Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual press conference. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. First, all lines are on mute. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point during our presentation, please explain your problem through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address the issue. We will hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So in order to ask a question, please go to the control panel and click Raise Hand. We will call your name and unmute your audio to speak. All materials from today's press conference will be available on our website after at njoag.gov. We're recording this video and it will be available on our YouTube page within 24 hours. Please subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr for the latest updates on news, information, and resources from our office. And now I'd like to hand things off to our first speaker today, Attorney General Kabir Grewal.
Good afternoon, everyone. Earlier today, our office filed criminal charges against 3 correctional police officers assigned to the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility, a women's prison located in Hunterdon County. The 3 officers are charged for their role in an incident that began in the late hours of January 11th, during which a number of inmates were assaulted in violation of state law and DOC policy. This is an active and very much ongoing investigation, and we anticipate additional criminal charges as this case progresses. Although I'm limited in what I can say right now, here's what I can share. As alleged in today's complaints, shortly before midnight on January 11th, more than 24 officers at Edna Mahan forcibly removed a number of inmates from their prison cells. The officers were organized into groups known as extraction teams. One of these extraction teams was led by Sergeant Amir Bethea. Another team was led by Sergeant Anthony Valvano. Generally speaking, under DOC policy, extraction teams cannot forcibly remove inmates from their cells without first giving the inmates an opportunity to comply with the officer's request to exit voluntarily, nor can they use force beyond what is objectively reasonable. As alleged in today's complaints, the teams led by Sergeants Bethea and Valvano disregarded those policies and did so violently. We allege that they deployed pepper spray, rushed into the inmate's cell, and beat several of the victims without justification. One of the most troubling extractions was led by Sergeant Bethea. During the removal, one of the officers under his supervision, Officer Luis Garcia, allegedly struck a victim approximately 28 times with his closed fist, even as she was pressed up against the cell wall, her back facing the officers, her arms attempting to cover her face. We take all of these allegations seriously. Unfortunately, our investigation was delayed in part by false and misleading reports filed by officers who attempted to cover up what they had done and the injuries they had caused. That said, as soon as we learned about the January 11th incident, we immediately deployed a team of investigators and prosecutors, led by our Office of Public Integrity and Accountability, and supported by the Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office, to determine whether any laws were broken. Now, 3 weeks later, we've filed the first wave of charges in this case. All 3 of the individuals named today, Sergeants Bethea and Valvano and Officer Garcia, are charged with second-degree official misconduct, a crime which, upon conviction, requires a mandatory sentence of 5 years in prison. We continue to collect evidence, including by reviewing video footage from that evening, to determine who else, at any level of the prison's hierarchy, was responsible for these criminal acts. Our complaints reference video evidence. Once we have completed our initial investigation, we will publicly release the video footage, as we have done and will continue to do in any serious use of force investigation. As I've said many times before, we're working to make New Jersey a national leader in policing. We're doing this by placing strict limits on when law enforcement officers can use force. All of our residents have a right to be treated with basic decency, and all officers have an obligation to avoid force except when absolutely necessary. Those principles don't just apply in our streets and our schools, but also in our prisons. Likewise, a victim of physical abuse is entitled to compassion and respectful treatment, even when that victim happens to be a prison inmate. That's why our office has also deployed not just detectives and prosecutors in this case, but also victim witness advocates to speak with the inmates who were targeted on January 11th and to help them obtain the necessary medical and psychological services they need. It goes without saying that Edna Mahan has a long and ugly history, one that has justifiably attracted scrutiny from county, state, and federal investigators. That's why we must do more than simply figure out what went wrong on January 11th. We must hold accountable all parties responsible, and we must fix the systemic failures that made this incident possible. I'm committed to using the full resources in my office, and with the assistance of the Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office, we will tackle this problem head on. Let me now turn it over to Director Eicher, who will walk through the specific charges filed against these officers. Tom?
Thank you, Attorney General Graywall. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Eicher, and I serve as the Director of the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability, or OPIA. As OPIA Director, I oversee our office's investigations into excessive use of force by law enforcement, including corrections officers. As the Attorney General said, once our office learned of the January incident, we jumped into action. We partnered with the Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office, deploying investigators and victim coordinators to Edna Mahan. We are still in the early stages of this investigation, but we now have sufficient evidence to bring criminal charges against 3 officers assigned to Edna Mahan. Sergeant Amir Bethea is charged with 2 counts of official misconduct and 2 counts of tampering with public records, based on his involvement with 2 separate victims. Sergeant Anthony Valvano is charged with 1 count of official misconduct and 1 count of tampering with public records. For both defendants, the charges relate to their roles as leaders of the so-called extraction teams. As supervisors, the defendants had a legal duty to ensure that their teams followed the proper protocols and did not use excessive force when removing inmates from their cells. Both defendants failed in that duty. As alleged in today's complaints, the forced extraction teams violently assaulted multiple inmates, including an inmate who was voluntarily complying with their orders, a situation where no force should have been used. 1 victim suffered an orbital wall fracture of her right eye. Another victim was left bleeding from her mouth and lip and suffered a concussion. We allege that these actions clearly violated DOC policy and regulations and our state's criminal laws as set forth in today's round of complaints. In addition, once the violence ended, Sergeant Bethea and Sergeant Valvano both attempted to cover it up by filing false reports about the incident, downplaying the seriousness of the incident and failing to document the true nature of the officer's actions that evening. A 3rd defendant, Officer Luis Garcia, is also charged with official misconduct and tampering with public records. In addition, he is charged with a 3rd count for aggravated assault. As the Attorney General stated, Officer Garcia was a member of Sergeant Bethea's extraction team. In one instance, he struck a victim 28 times in the head area, causing serious bodily injury, including a concussion. If convicted, all 3 defendants face a mandatory 5-year sentence for official misconduct and a sentence of 3 to 5 years, including a mandatory 2-year term of parole ineligibility for tampering with public records. Defendant Bethea faces an additional 5-year sentence for a 2nd count of official misconduct and an additional sentence of 3 to 5 years, including a mandatory 2-year term of parole ineligibility for the 2nd count of tampering with public records. Officer Garcia faces an additional sentence of 5 to 10 years with a parole ineligibility of 85% of the sentence imposed. As you will see from the complaints, today's charges relate specifically to 2 victims who are simply identified as Victim 1 and Victim 2. There were, of course, other inmates removed from their cells that evening, and we continue to investigate the circumstances surrounding those removals. We're reviewing the significant video footage recorded that evening and comparing it to other evidence in the case, including witness statements. We intend to release additional information about the incident as our investigation progresses. I'd like to thank the team of investigators and prosecutors who worked around the clock on this case, including investigators from the SID at Department of Corrections. I'd also like to thank our victim coordinators who are ensuring that we treat our victims with dignity and respect during this difficult time. As always, we welcome tips from anyone who has information about misconduct. If you wish to report information about criminal activity at Edna Mahan or any other correctional facility, call us at 844-OPIA-TIPS, and I'll turn it back to the Attorney General.
Thank you, Director Eicher. And before we get to your questions, I want to turn it over to Hunterdon County Prosecutor Michael Williams, whose office was a vital partner in the investigation to date and will continue to be a partner as we move forward in this case. Mike?
Thank you, General. I appreciate that. And thank you, Director Eicher, for your words as well. For a decade, the Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office has investigated dozens of inmate complaints of abuse at the hands of correctional police officers who wield great power and control over those within their custody. We have prosecuted and convicted numerous officers of sexual assault, official misconduct, and other related crimes. We will never tolerate such conduct and will continue to carefully review all allegations of mistreatment or criminal abuse at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. My office will be working diligently with the Attorney General's office in pursuing the current charges. Law enforcement works best when we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Prosecutor. And with that, we'll turn it to your questions, which Whitney will moderate. Whitney?
Yes, so we're going to open up to a few on-topic questions at this time. Just a reminder again for housekeeping, please go to the control panel to raise your hand and to enter the queue. I will call your name and then unmute your audio to speak at that time. All right, General, we have our first question here comes from Sean Sullivan at Advanced Media. Sean, I'm unmuting your mic now. Sean, you should be able to speak there. All right, we will come back. I think he might be self-muted. We have our next question here. We'll come back there to Sean. We have a question and a hand raised here from Elise Young. Elise from Bloomberg. Elise, we're gonna unmute your mic there. You're self-muted, so if you can unmute on your end.
Hello.
Hello there, Elise.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Very good. Thank you. Apologize for that. Was there any incident that preceded this expulsion of the women from their cells? Had there been some sort of protest by them or some kind of action that was taken? Also, can you tell me what sort of terms are these women serving, the women who were targeted? Are these people who had been serving very long terms for very serious crimes, or were they kind of mid-level offenders? Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. I'll start with your second question first with respect to the victims. We've not identified the victims, and I'm not going to answer questions about their charges or why they're currently in custody. It's irrelevant to what transpired here. They were assaulted. In the case of the two victims, we've charged officers Bethea, Garcia, and Valvano with. And so beyond that, we're not going to comment on the victims or the nature of the charges they're serving their sentences on. With respect to what precipitated the events of January 11th and 12th, We are continuing our investigation, and we will be bringing additional charges, as I've indicated, which will lay bare what led to the events and who was responsible. We are going to hold people accountable regardless of where they fell in the chain of command.
We have a question here. And actually, before we go to the question, I just wanted to note if anybody's having any issues with their tech when it comes to unmuting their mic, feel free to type in your question into the control panel in the questions pane, and we can read that question out for you. But I'm going to go to the next hand raise that we have from Mike Catalini from the AP. Mike, we have your hand raised there. We're going to unmute your mic. Mike, you should unmute it there.
Yep. I'm here. Thanks, General. Thanks, guys. I'm sorry if I missed it, but can you say how many inmates were attacked and what is their status? Like, how are they now? Like, are any still in the hospital? Were any left with, what sort of condition are they in now? Can you just give us an update on the victims?
Sure, Mike. Thanks for that question. Going back to Lisa's question, I just want to be absolutely clear that, we're not going to identify the victims. I know some have chosen to identify themselves as they've reached out to the media. But I want to make plain that all victims, regardless of what their custody status is, regardless of the charge, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of why they're currently incarcerated. And clearly, here in this case, with respect to the two victims that we've pursued charges on, with the three officers, they were not treated with the dignity and respect that they deserved. In fact, they were assaulted physically and violently. At this point, 6 victims total have come forward, and we continue to pursue additional evidence. So again, additional charges will be forthcoming. The injuries, and I'll turn it over to the director to amplify my answer, but the injuries range from the obvious psychological trauma that would have been inflicted upon them by the events of January 11th and 12th, to scratches in some cases, to concussions in others, and to an orbital fracture in another. Tom, anything to add to that answer?
I would just add, in addition to bruises and cuts, the victims were treated at the hospital and released and returned to the institution.
So none are currently hospitalized.
We're going to go try and go back to Sean, who I think had one of our first questions up. Sean, we're going to unmute your mic. Sean, you're on.
Thank you. General, prior to your appointment, OAG hired outside counsel to review conditions at Edna Mahan and offer suggestions. As far as I know, that never resulted in any sort of internal report or public report. But given the continued failures here by the DOC to rein in what's going on, I mean, is your office considering, or does it even have the authority to step in with any sort of monitorship or other type of oversight?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sean. As I said earlier in my remarks, there's a long and ugly history at Edna Mahan. That there have been allegations of abuse in the past. There have been prosecutions in the past. The Department of Justice issued a report in April of last year detailing a pervasive culture, as they called it, of mistreatment of inmates, of sexual abuse of inmates. We're using all of our tools to make sure we're holding accountable those that engaged in this conduct, and those are criminal tools. So we are bringing the charges we brought today to send a strong deterrent message. That's why we are not waiting till all of the charges are ready in this case, but rather proceeding in phases to send a message that we're going to hold everyone accountable that contributed to the events of January 11th and January 12th, regardless of where they fall on the chain of command, and that we'll continue to pursue the evidence wherever it leads, up and down that chain of command. Those are the tools that I have that I'm going to use to hold everyone accountable in this case. And again, it goes well beyond January 11th and 12th. We are going to look and are looking at systemic abuse that took place at Edna Mahan, and we're going to use all of our tools to hold those individuals accountable.
All right, we have a question here from Elise Young at Bloomberg. Elise, we're going to unmute your mic.
Hi, 2 more questions for you. what is the employment status of the individuals who have been charged, and are they in custody? And how many inmates total do you believe suffered some of this humiliation?
So again, we've identified 6 victims who've come forward. We encourage others to come forward if they were the victims of abuse on January 11th and 12th and have not already spoken to us, or if they've experienced abuse before that time, whether they're still incarcerated at Edna Mahan or have been since released. 1844 OPI tips is the line that we put out for that information. With respect to the employment status of the 3 officers who were charged today, I'd refer you to the Department of Corrections. They were charged on complaint summons. That's what the bail reform laws and rules in New Jersey call for these charges. They're not on complaint warrants. They'll have their initial appearances at a future date, and we'll provide that information.
Thank you.
We have a question here from Stacy Barringer. Stacy, we're going to unmute your mic.
Okay, great, thank you. I just had a quick clarification. Somebody had referenced that the inmates were complying with orders when they were violently assaulted. I just want to make sure that applies to the 2 women who were reflected, or the 2 victims reflected in the charges today, and not the other potentially 4.
In one case, in one of the victims' cases in connection to today's charges, the victim voluntarily put her hands through the food port of her jail cell, was cuffed, and was still attacked after that. In the other case, and Tom can correct me, the victim did not provide her hands to be handcuffed, but the extraction team still violated their protocols, entered that jail cell, and attacked her by punching her around the head over 28 times without giving her an opportunity to comply with their commands. Tom?
That's correct. The one victim complied with the directives that she was given, was fully compliant. Second victim did not comply by allowing herself to be handcuffed, but nonetheless, so some entry into the cell was justified, but the level of force used was excessive, we allege, in the complaint.
And that was the case in which the victim was punched 28 times while she was pinned up against the wall.
And I'll just add that we're really not in a position to comment at this point on what occurred with the other inmates who may have been part of this extraction process that occurred that evening. That's part of the ongoing investigation.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question here from Joe A. from Advanced Media. Joe, we're going to unmute your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, Joe.
Cool, thanks. Appreciate you guys doing this. Question, dozens of lawmakers have called for Commissioner Hicks to resign as this investigation is ongoing for the general. Are you confident with Commissioner Hicks overseeing the DOC as this goes forward? And any comments on how this could have been some sort of systematic failure? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. Hopefully I've made clear by now in my prior answers, I am 100% focused on our criminal investigation. That is my priority right now. As to your other questions, that's not my call, and it's up to the governors and the others to decide on the commissioner status. But I am here to hold anyone accountable who contributed to injuries to inmates in violation of our laws on January 11th and 12th, or before, or since, if that's the case. And I'll use all the tools at our disposal, working with Tom, his team, Mike, and his team to hold those individuals accountable.
Okay, we have a question here. We're going to start, I'm going to take a few more left. We have a question here from Tracy Tully. Tracy, we're going to unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you. Are you investigating claims of sexual assault, and how many rape kits were collected on February 12th or 13th?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tracy. As Tom indicated with respect to the other 4 victims, those investigations are still ongoing. There will be additional charges. We're not in a position to make comments on those particular cases right now.
Great, and we have time to address 3 more. So we're going to go to Blake Nelson from NJ Advanced Media. Blake, we're unmuting your mic. Blake, you're self-muted.
Can you hear me okay now?
We can, Blake.
Okay. I wanted to ask, before you release the video, I wanted to know if you could give more details of just what type of video it was. Was this surveillance footage, or were officers actually filming the extractions?
There is both, Blake. There is video surveillance footage from the cell blocks, and then there is footage that's filmed of the extractions, and we'll be releasing both once we've completed our initial phase of the investigation.
Okay, thanks.
And time for 2 more left. We're going to go to Joe Hernandez. Joe with the WHYY. Joe, you're unmuted.
Hi there. 2 questions. Attorney General, you mentioned January 12th. Did this just go past midnight, or was this over many hours between the 2 days? Can you explain the time frame? And also, you said there would be more charges. Are those additional charges for the 3 defendants? Are these new defendants, or will it be some combination of both? Thanks.
To your last question, certainly additional defendants, potentially additional charges for these defendants. And let me make plain to those that participated in the events that took place on the 11th and the 12th, the time to come forward is now. The time to speak to our investigators is now. The time to provide information relevant to this investigation is now. And we are going to pursue the evidence in this case wherever it leads and to whomever it leads. With respect to the timeline, these extractions started late on January 11th, Joe, and continued into the early morning hours of January 12th. And we'll be providing additional detail as to what the events leading up to these extractions were as we bring additional charges in the near future. Tom, anything to add to that answer?
No, I think that's it. That covers it, Attorney General.
Okay, we're coming close to the top of the hour. We have time for 1 last question. We're going to go to Colleen O'Day from NJ Spotlight. Colleen, you're unmuted.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted to ask, were these extractions valid? Were they conducted for a valid reason? And you talk about extractions as if they are something that are valid. Can you explain when an extraction is, valid to occur? And then secondly, I wanted to ask, can you just comment, what is the status of that we were told back in September that there was a potential settlement with the DOJ on that April report, but we haven't heard anything more. Do you know has the state settled that? Is there some sort of agreement?
Yeah, on the status of the DOJ's April 2020 report and how that's being resolved or addressed, I would refer you to the Department of Justice to update you on the status of that. The use of extractions, when they're valid, when they're not, what precipitated them in this case, whether or not they were valid or not, that is squarely the subject of our ongoing investigation. And so I'm not going to comment on any of that at this point, but suffice to say, you'll be hearing more about it as we move forward in this case.
All right, I think that is all the time that we have here today. So thank you all for joining us here. Again, if you need any additional materials or follow up, please visit njoag.gov to receive the additional materials from this announcement.